Continuing on with chapter 16, starting on page 430. So the next couple of biomes are estuaries. So our salt marsh is a type of biome, and our mangrove forest is a type of biome, and they're an estuary, which is a wetland where the river meets the ocean. We have salt marshes in California because we are in a temperate location. Across the country where the land goes further south. So California is further north than Florida. If you take a look at a map, you're going to see Florida and the Gulf Coast is further south. So they're in a tropical location, a tropical latitude, and so they have mangrove forests there, where we have salt marshes off of our coast. So an estuary is where a river meets the ocean and has brackish water, which is part fresh, part salt. Now, salt levels in an estuary can vary with whether it's high tide or low tide, lots of waves or little bit of waves, which has to do with storms. So a storm in the ocean way over in Asia can create waves that take a few days, but they can create bigger waves in California. The waves just take a couple days to move across the ocean. And so higher waves can create more salt in the estuary. Freshwater rain can lower the salt in the estuary. Also, the temperature can go up or down. So when it's high tide in our salt marsh, the cold water comes in and it's colder. And then at low tide, the cold water goes out and the estuary is warmer. So there are huge amounts of benefits for estuaries and wetlands. They benefit economically and ecologically. Extremely important, and this stuff is all here in all of this page. You need to have some specific examples of things that help humans ecologically and economically. So ecosystem services as well. Next is 431. So now we have coral reefs. Corals are tropical and mutualistic. Oh, they live in the tropics, so they're tropical corals, most of them. There's actually a few that aren't, but most of them are in tropical locations. That's why we don't have coral off of the California coast. We're not tropical. They're mutualistic with zooxanthellae, so that X is a Z sound, zooxanthellae, which is an algae. So they live together, and so the zooxanthellae photosynthesize and give energy to the coral. Coral's actually an animal. It's related to a sea anemone. So the zooxanthellae is sensitive to temperature and pollution and can leave the coral, and so this is called coral bleaching. So the zooxanthellae gives it color. And so when you see a coral reef and it's greens and pinks and yellows, that's the color of the algae. So there's different species of zooxanthellae. And then when they leave the coral, all of the coral dies off, and we call it coral bleaching. So we have some benefits of coral: biodiversity, nursery for fishes. In other words, it protects young fish, absorbs wave energy, provides tourism. Here's our main threats to coral reefs. Fishing techniques. Sometimes fishing techniques scrape coral reefs, or they cut the reefs so that fishing boats can get in and out. And for other boats, not just fishing, but other shipping boats. Sewage and toxins can run off and cause algal blooms and eutrophication, or toxic algal blooms. Ocean acidification is having a big problem. Higher temperatures can cause the zooxanthellae to leave. Sediment runoffs can also damage coral reefs. They can block the light to prevent photosynthesis. On page 432, let's talk about marine pollution. So we talk about trash and plastic pollution here at the bottom of the page, plastic debris. Most of the plastic debris in the ocean is actually not from the U.S. So the U.S. does a lot of, bad environmental things, but the pollution in our ocean, some of it off our coast is ours, but the big amounts of trash in the ocean mainly come from other countries where they don't have the money and the infrastructure to take care of their trash, so a lot of it flows into the ocean with rainwater. And then some just take all their trash and they dump it in the ocean. So this has led to the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So wildlife entangle and also eat the garbage. So these are two separate things. So the trash can lead to the Great Pacific Garbage Path, and then we also, wildlife can get entangled. They can also eat it. Here's a couple pictures. Here's plastic entangling the seal. Here's this bird that has eaten all of this trash, thinking it was food. And then here's a country that has just dumped tons and tons of garbage into the ocean. So litter in the ocean can cause intestinal blockage that we saw, choking hazards, toxins, so all this plastic in the food chain. Microplastics is big in the news right now because these are tiny pieces of plastic from a lot of our products in the ocean, that we use, that are teeny tiny microscopic pieces of plastic that get washed into the ocean, and then plankton absorb them, and then even other fish eat these microplastics thinking they're plankton. Then what happens is these plastics can be endocrine disruptors, and they work their way up the food chain through biomagnification and bioaccumulation. And eventually they can get into humans, these toxins from plastic. If we eat a lot of food from the oceans. So it's not even food from the ocean. Microplastics are also being found in our food chain, our normal food chains on land too, because microplastics, we can't see them. A lot of times they're not taken out with wastewater treatment plants. And so they get in animal water. Cows drink it, chickens drink it, and then it builds up in their bodies, and we eat that too. So microplastics we're starting to learn what a terrible problem it is. They say a person ingests a credit card amount of microplastics in like a week or a month. We're not even aware of it. So that's something that should be in the forefront to try and solve that problem. And there's people working on that problem too. So we will figure that one out. Okay, 436. It's just microplastics is just something new we've learned is happening, and so now we're going to figure out the solutions for it. And you guys can be part of that too. You are almost to college and career and can do research and figure out the solutions for that, since we now know it's happening. Okay, so oil pollution. So we have a picture here of oil pollution. There's actually natural seeps of oil in the ocean. So petroleum oil comes out through cracks. If you go to Carpinteria, again, I know I talk a lot about Carpinteria, but you can get tar on your feet. That's actually from natural oil seeps in the ocean, which kind of combines into tar balls and washes up on land. You can also see it kind of over by the state campground. It comes out of the ground there. You can see it on land. And then there's other seeps in the ocean. So it's not, all the oil in the ocean is not from oil spills, but a lot of it's from oil spills. So oil spills, when it's on the surface of water, coats the feathers and fur of species, which can make them where they can't fly. So if you have oil on your feathers, a bird can't fly. Fur, they can't swim as well. They can get sick if they try and lick it off. Oil that sinks can kill benthics, so bottom organisms. Oil on the beaches lowers tourism and money from fishing, from commercial fishing. Also, oil in the water can lower the money made from commercial fishing. How do we clean up oil spills? Well, booms corral the oil to be sucked up by skimmer boats. Genetically modified bacteria can digest the oil. Chemical dispersants break the oil into smaller components. The problem with chemical dispersants is it gets rid of the oil slick, but we actually don't have any research on the long-term effects of these chemicals in the water too. All right, next part is algal blooms. So when you have nutrient runoff, a huge amount of nutrients into water, it can cause eutrophication, so an algal bloom, but it also can cause a toxic algal bloom. which we sometimes call a red tide. So there's a type of microorganism that's red in color, a phytoplankton called dinoflagellate, a type of dinoflagellate. And it's red naturally, but you normally don't see it. So like if you go to the beach, there's these dinoflagellates that are red all over, but you don't see it because there's not that many of them. But when you have nutrient runoff, all of a sudden they multiply and make tons and tons of copies of themselves because they have all this nutrient from sewage or other kind of runoff. And now you can see them because there's millions and millions and millions more than there normally would be. And so they concentrate together and you can see their color. They also produce a toxin that can hurt you. So this is whenever there's a red tide, they have notices that say like, don't eat fish or shellfish. So don't eat the clams or the mussels or even fish from this area because they've absorbed this toxin in their bodies, and if you eat it, you can get sick. We also have another toxin. It's not a red tide, but it's another type of phytoplankton bloom and it produces an acid called domoic acid, and we get these blooms off of our coast on occasion. So domoic acid. All right, going on, let's talk about overfishing. So overfishing is when we have an extreme scarcity of some species, like cod is the famous case study of overfishing. When we overfish and we have scarcity, we've lessened the biodiversity. We also harm people who depend on fishing for food or making money. So there's actually like a third of the world's population or more depends on the ocean for their protein. They don't have enough land space for cattle or chicken or pigs, so they get their protein from the ocean. And when you overfish, now we're talking about a food scarcity issue for huge amounts of people, especially in Asia, but other parts of the world as well. 439. So here are some techniques that have caused us to have population crashes. Sonar after World War II, satellites, thermal sensing. So first it leads to a lot higher catches and then population crashes. Here's some fishing techniques that can cause harm. Drift netting, which is here, long lining, bottom trawling. They all have too much bycatch, which is catching things you're not intended to catch. So make sure you read through and you know the different kinds of fishing techniques that have led to overfishing in the past couple of decades. You can see page 440, the damage caused by bottom trawling. So it's scraping the bottom to get things like halibut that live on the bottom. So they're flat fish on the bottom, and then you scrape the bottom to catch your halibut, but now you've lost this whole benthic community. So it's kind of a problem. Page 441, you have here the cod decline. So just read and understand the crash in the cod population. Page 442, so how do we solve this? So the AP test will ask about solutions. How do we solve this? Well, there are a lot of sustainable fisheries, places where they have limits on how much you can catch. We talked about this when we studied Tragedy of the Commons. So we have some sustainable choices here for consumers. There's updated lists that you can get. The Monterey Bay Aquarium has an app, Seafood Watch app, that you can download and find out which seafood is sustainable or not. In sustainable fisheries, they practice maximum sustainable yield, the number of fish that can be caught and still leave enough to reproduce for the next year's catch. We do this through quotas, licenses, size limits. Sometimes we say no female fish. If you watch Deadliest Catch, this is what they do with the crab industry. We've also put in place marine protected areas and marine reserves. So these are solutions to overfishing. Make sure you read about those. On the next page, it talks more about marine reserves, and marine reserves were opposed at first by fishermen, and then fishermen realized they were benefiting them. So know how reserves benefit fishermen, so make sure you read that. And that's the end of chapter 16.